as you ramp up your direct to seller business, you're going to want to spend less and less time on leads that are not going to fit your typical seller profile. Welcome to the Ryan Rice Show, where we talk about what we learned yesterday that we can apply today so that we can be better tomorrow. I hope you enjoy and subscribe. What is going on, everyone? In today's podcast, I want to get a little more tactical today and talk about how to qualify a direct seller lead. And so this is if you are running a real estate direct to seller marketing business, all different ways to market, and that will be a topic for another episode. This is how to qualify them. In other words, when they call in, how to tell if they're a lead that's going to fit the product and the services that you offer, and whether or not you're going to pass them off to a closer, or if you are the closer, whether or not you're going to spend that time getting them closed. So let's jump right in. And I want to start by giving a big shout out to Josh and Tiffany High. For those of you that don't know who they are, they're a couple in Columbus, Ohio. They run a $3 to $4 million, might be more actually, per year flipping and wholesaling business. And they operate a pretty large education business as well. And if you want to learn how to run a wholesaling and a flipping business, I highly suggest you check them out. They have a 2-day product where you can go fly out to Columbus and spend time with them. And they also have a more intimate product where you can spend 6 months getting coached and trained by them. But I know them personally. I did their 2-day product and I got a ton out of it. And a lot of what I'm about to tell you, I learned from them. And I'm also going to share the experiences I've had in hundreds and hundreds of seller conversations that I've had over the last several years. So let's jump right in. What we are looking to identify to qualify a direct seller lead is going to be 3 things. The first thing, we're going to identify if there's urgency. And urgency is going to be a little bit different than timeline, and we'll talk about the distinction, but urgency is going to be what we're going to identify first. The second thing we're going to identify is the seller in pain? And if so, to what extent? And so in other words, how motivated is the seller? And what is the motivation coming from? And then the third thing we're going to identify is what price do they want to sell the property for? And what I have found after hundreds of direct to seller conversations, I went back and looked every single deal that I've done. Each of these sellers has had at least 2 of the 3, if not all 3 of these boxes checked. In other words, each of the sellers had urgency, each of them pain was present, and so there was motivation, and each of them fit a price that I will define when we get to that section, and we'll kind of talk through what that looks like. And first and most importantly, why do we want to qualify a direct seller lead? Why not just go through our entire sales process with every single lead? Well, as you ramp up your direct seller business, you're going to want to spend less and less time on leads that are not going to fit your typical seller profile. In other words, you're going to have a lot of people who call you and they're just curious about your process and they just want to find out more information. And if you're spending time on qualified leads, or if you're passing off leads that are not qualified to closers, then we're spending our time inefficiently. We want to spend our time helping the ideal client that is going to do business with us. And so it's important to quickly qualify or disqualify a lead so that we can get on to the next lead that may or may not be qualified. So that's the reason why this is important. And think about it this too, like your value proposition as a direct seller marketer where you're going to buy and flip someone's house, or you're going to wholesale it potentially, your value proposition is a lot different than the value proposition a realtor can offer to a seller, right? And so you are going to have clients call in who just want retail value and who are running towards pleasure and maybe not running away from pain. And in those cases, the problems that you're able to solve, they don't fit the problems that that seller has, and therefore it's not going to be worth it for them to do business with you. And they're going to realize that as they get down in the process. And the last thing you want to do is spend 30 to 60 minutes on a single lead, and then you go to present them an offer, and they're like, oh no, there's no way, right? So the purpose of going through this and mastering the qualifying process is so that you don't spend an hour plus with a lead and you get all the way to the offer and it was dead from the outset. There was no chance you were going to do business with them from the outset. And once you realize that the leads that are calling into you, you have a value proposition because you can get their home closed on quickly. You can do so without any contingencies, whether that be an inspection or a finance contingency. You increase the level of certainty that someone's going to close and you can get it done quickly. Those are all things that are important to our typical seller avatar, and to sellers that can sit around and they're not super motivated, or they can wait for the best price on their house. You don't have a value proposition that can give them what it is that they're looking for, and therefore you want to identify that early on in the process so that you're not spending time on them. So wanted to quickly go through the reason why it's important to ensure that every single lead that comes in, you are taking the time to qualify them, because you don't want to be spending time on leads that are not going to serve your business. So here's what happens. A lead calls in, and the first thing that we're going to do is identify urgency. And the way that we do this is we make our introductions, and we just ask them, like, hey, are you, let's assume that we can come to an agreement. Are you absolutely ready to sell your house now? And the ones that are going to fit our avatar are going to say yes, right? They're absolutely ready to sell their house. But then there are we have to take it a bit further, because there are people that are going to answer yes to that question and they still don't have urgency. And I actually identify this with the follow-up specialists on my team, and I came up with an analogy that I thought was relatable and fitting. And so if you have ever drank coffee before and then have gotten in the car for like an hour to a 2-hour car ride, you drink coffee and at some point, like, okay, at some point I'm probably going to have to stop to pee, right? And so at that point that you're going to have to go to the bathroom, but you drink coffee anyways because you're in love with coffee or for whatever reason that you're drinking it. Well, as the drive goes by, at some point during the drive, you get to a point where you're like, okay, if I don't pull over at a gas station right now, or if I don't find somewhere to go to the bathroom right now, there's going to be a problem. And so in the beginning of that, you're going to have to go to the bathroom, but it doesn't become urgent until, you start to feel where like, okay, there's a problem. And so how this is applicable to our sellers is there may be sellers that say, oh yeah, I'm definitely going to sell my house, but because that they're not in pain, they may be able to wait around. Like, they don't care if it happens in the next 3 months. They don't care if it happens in the next 6 months. They just know that at some point they're going to sell it. And there are various circumstances that would fall into that. And so it's important not to confuse timelines with urgency. If someone says that they're ready to sell now, we have to dig a little bit further and figure out, okay, at what point is it getting urgent, right? Is it to the point where the seller's like, yeah, there is a problem. I need to sell this house right now. And we identify that by, when we ask, are you definitely ready to sell that now? The follow-up question that we ask is like, and we have to do this with really good tonality, is we have to ask, I'm curious, what has you considering selling the property? Right? And it has to be genuine curiosity. And as the person gets talking and we find out a little bit of what is motivating them to sell, we're going to be able to identify to what extent is the situation urgent, or can the seller be patient and there is not much urgency. And so that kind of transitions as we're asking these questions. Oh, what has you considering selling the property? Now is when we get into, okay, are they running away from pain or are they running towards pleasure? Real quick, everyone, we have hit a milestone. This is my 20th episode that's been uploaded. And I read a statistic that less than 1% of people who start a podcast hit 20 episodes. And so I really enjoyed this. It's hard to believe that I posted my first episode a little over 2 months ago now, and I'm looking forward to continuing to make them. If you have gotten some value out of this, if you could take a quick second to send or share an episode to someone that you know, that would mean a great deal to me, and I would really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much for listening, and let's get back to the show. And so, for example, and for those of you that run direct to seller, know like a motivated lead, the people that are in pain most, maybe in a difficult family situation, maybe someone passed and doesn't have the capacity to take care of the property or fix it up to an extent of where they want to list it on the market, or maybe someone has come through some financial problems and selling the house is going to help get them through their financial problems. The more pain that exists, the better that your value proposition is going to fit what it is that they're looking for, because we can solve those problems in a quicker time frame, typically in an average transaction, than a realtor can. And so asking the question, what has you thinking about selling, is going to start on uncovering, what their level of motivation is. And we have to ask a lot of good follow-up questions there, right? So someone might say, I'm looking to downsize. And I've had sellers who are very motivated and running away from significant pain who say, I'm looking to downsize. And I've had sellers who have no pain, but just say, I want to downsize. And so the reason of why someone is selling, as an example of downsizing, is just one, that's just one example that a seller will share, and it may mean different things. We have to ask those follow-up questions, or teach our follow-up team to ask the follow-up questions. And so in that example, I might say something like downsize, which is a mirroring technique for those of you that know Chris Voss. But I'm going to repeat the same thing back, but with upper inflection, just so they go in more. And then they might say something like, my house is falling apart. I can't maintain it. It's too big. The grass is like 3 feet tall because I just had surgery and I can't get out, and I can't get it sold, or I can't cut the grass. And all of those things are going to indicate pain. And then another example of where someone might say that they want to downsize, but there's no pain, is they might say, my kids went to college and they moved out, and it's just too big of a house, and I just don't want that big of a house. And so the more that you dive deep about a situation, the more you're going to uncover, okay, to what extent of pain is the person in, or is the individual running towards pleasure? And so based on the answers that we gather from those questions, we're going to be able to tell, is there urgency? And then, is there pain, or is there motivation? And typically answering yes to both of those things means that the lead is going to be qualified. And so once we identify whether or not there's urgency and whether or not there's pain, then we kind of want to have an idea of what price that they have in mind for the house. And there's two ways that I like to do this. The first way that I'll do it is, you in the beginning of the call, you're going to gather information about like the address and whatnot. And so while I'm on the phone, I'm looking the property up on Redfin or Zillow, and there's going to be some sort of Redfin estimate, right? And based on whatever that Redfin estimate is, the first thing I might gather information about price is I might say something like, hey, actually, I know this neighborhood pretty well, and I'm looking at the data here online, and it looks like homes like yours are selling off market to investors like myself in the 100 to 130 range. Is that kind of the range that you thought? Or is that kind of the range that you were expecting? And right away, you're going to get some sort of reaction from them, and you're going to be able to tell if that's within the range or not within the range. So that's kind of one way that I would get information about price. And the reason why I do like getting price that way is because then we have the ability to anchor them to price. In other words, if we get their number first and then we present our number, if there is a wide gap, then there's a big psychological disparity, right? But if we anchor them in the beginning, and let's say I say, hey, it looks like homes like yours are selling off market to investors like us in the 100 to 130 range, and then you come back with an offer and your offer is closer to 130, then we've anchored them really low, and now we have at least come to the top end of the expectation, right? By the way, how I come up with, which numbers to use, that 100 to 130 range, how I come up with that is I'll typically take like a smaller percentage of whatever the Redfin estimate is, right? And so if the Redfin estimate is 200, I might take, anywhere from 50 to 70% of that and have that be the range. Even though I have no idea what I'm going to be able to offer for the house, presenting a number first and using an anchoring technique can help get them in the right frame of mind. Because here's what happens: they might have seen a house in their neighborhood sell for 200, and it sold for 200 with a new kitchen, new floors, new bath, new paint, new roof, new air conditioning, and a lot of sellers may have trouble distinguishing the condition of their house and just a house in a neighborhood sold for 200, and so that's the expectation. Well, now if they called you thinking that they wanted 200 for the house and you anchor them with 100 to 130, you've completely reframed their expectation. And now, had you asked, hey, what kind of price were you expecting for the house first, and they would have said 200, now maybe they say 170, 160, and the 200 number never even enters the discussion because you've already kind of anchored them. So that is one price technique that I really like to use. And then the second price technique, and how I'll decide whether or not I use either one of these, is just going to be dependent upon the flow of the conversation. But the second price technique is just asking them, hey, what's the ballpark price you're hoping to get for the property? Right? And so if the flow of the conversation has gone well, if I've built good rapport with the seller, and it doesn't sound completely out of left field, then that's when I'll use the price anchoring technique. The last thing I want is for the price conversation to sound completely out of left field, or for me just to randomly say, oh, it looks like homes like yours are selling off market to investors like me in the blank to blank range, and that be kind of an abnormal way to say that. And in other words, I don't just want that to be part of a script. I want to find a way to make sure that weaves into the conversation. And I think the more and more of these conversations that you have with your sellers, the better that you'll get at that. But then after I ask the anchoring question, is that about what you expected? They're going to give me a number at that point. They'll either say, yeah, that's about the range. And then in which case I know that the price bucket would check and it's qualified, or they're going to say, well, I was hoping for like 160. And how I will qualify them off price is typically if a property is less than 10% of the Zillow or the Redfin value, it's enough for us to at least qualify them within that bucket and then move on to the next phase. The Zillow and the Redfin values, they're never exact sciences, and it's more of a guide. Just something that has worked well for me is using that 10% rule. And if they fall within that rule, then I'll just give it a check. And so there we have it. We have quickly, and a good follow-up specialist are going to be able to get this information in like 5 to 10 minutes. So this doesn't take a lot of time, but we've quickly identified whether or not there's urgency. We've quickly identified whether or not there's pain and what is their pain and to what extent. And then we've quickly identified what price that they have in mind is going to be acceptable for their home. And again, every single lead that I've closed over the past several years, they've had at least 2 of those. And so I think if you can check 2 out of the 3 of those boxes, whichever the 2, then I would call it a qualified lead. And then you could move on to the next stage of your process or pass it on to a closer. So we'll get on, we'll talk about how to go through and process a lead in another fashion. But I wanted to share with you how we qualify leads, how we tell if someone is going to fit the avatar or the seller that we're most likely to help. And that way we can identify if our value proposition, because there's a lot of different ways that a seller could sell their house, we're going to identify if the solutions that we have is going to fit what it is that that seller needs. So I hope that was helpful. A little bit more tactical today, but I know there's a lot of people in this audience that are getting into flipping or want to get into wholesaling or may have already established that business. And I wanted to go through what's worked well for me in terms of how we have qualified leads. So hope you guys got some value out of that. And until the next episode, I will see you guys later. Peace.